The cover page of One Piece chapter 1125 features Yamato visiting Oden Castle while it is in the midst of being rebuilt. But the carpenter Minatomo is missing. Yamato actually thwarted a kidnapping on the way here, so we can assume the same thing is going on. I wonder who's responsible. The dust has finally begun to settle on Egghead Island. Now that the Marines have finally woken up, they started to collect the Seraphim. But interestingly, it's mentioned that the Seraphim need to charge. That opens up a lot of questions, like how long is their battery life in the first place? However, the weaponized Sea Beasts and Mark III Pacifista would be handled differently, which is also interesting. Just then, Rob Lucci and Kaku were greeted by several Cypher Pole agents. However, the agents were shocked to see that Stussy wasn't with them. Lucci let them know that Stussy was killed in action. Much to their horror, Stussy actually managed to leave the island, and Kaku was the last one to see her. Here, Kaku's face is shrouded. Lucci isn't the type of guy to cover for a traitor. So I'm inclined to believe that Kaku lied to his partner and told him that he took care of Stussy himself. So when Stussy inevitably resurfaces, I really wonder how Lucci will take the news. I feel like that's when we'll gain an even deeper understanding of the character and his history. And anytime CP0 is around, world-changing events are in progress, so it is bound to be one hell of a time. Aboard a naval ship, Saint Saturn addressed the many vice admirals. He claimed that they managed to collect everything they set out to get on the island. Now that they have Vegapunk York, Punk Records, and the power station in their possession, the Mother Flame has also become accessible. This is the task Immu set out for him, so the results themselves were satisfactory. However, they ran into one major issue. Red King was the first one to apologize to the Elder. Tosa added how disgraceful it was that they failed to capture Jewelry Bonnie and the Straw Hats. Doberman was ashamed that even their Grand Buster Call fleet and 9 vice admirals could not get the job done. And that's not even including the admiral they had with them. They wanted the Elder's permission to chase the pirates down to Elbaf. Saint Saturn mulled it over for a moment, but told them to forget about the pirates. Their failure was far worse than just that. They didn't see Vegapunk's broadcast coming and took too long to stop it. There was also the fact that Emeth showed up to help the pirates escape. Saturn couldn't help but see the irony. About 200 years ago, when Emeth attacked the Holy Land, Saturn actually told the scientists not to destroy it. They had already received orders to do so, but the Elder promised to take responsibility if the truth ever got out. So he insisted that they study it thoroughly. The researchers could hardly believe it. The robot was to be the future, an invaluable asset to their military might. The eager scientists were very grateful for the opportunity and pledged to do their best. Eventually, the robot wound up in Vegapunk's possession. Despite their best efforts, Emmet stayed dormant ever since. But Saint Saturn was certain that it moved to protect Luffy. With these reflections in mind, I feel like Saturn doesn't actually know much about Emeth, at least not as much as we would otherwise expect. Doberman made it clear that he is nothing but loyal to the world government. But since Saint Saturn was stressing Vegapunk's broadcast as such a major failure, he had to wonder if that might mean there was some truth to the Doctor's claims. Saint Saturn really didn't like that question, and Doberman knew that immediately. He was blasted back by the Elder. Vice Admiral Guillotine could only cry out in horror. They needed a medic right away. Elsewhere, Vegapunk York was having some trouble. Inside the lab, she could tell that something was up with the Sky Clouds. The situation wasn't looking so good. The production of Sky Clouds was endless. The entire cloud factory was in total disarray. It didn't take long for her to raise her weapon after realizing that this must be the work of her brother Edison. He refused to go quietly. The little punk laughed and accepted how right she was. York's weapon charged up and she blasted the terrain. But this is exactly what Edison wanted her to do, since it helped the clouds take off. Even after the battle's conclusion, the world government has taken yet another L. Punk Records has been taken away. In the Holy Land, the Celestial Dragons were very upset. They're so full of themselves that they would even call Dr. Vegapunk, the world's smartest man, a dimwit. They refused to believe a word he said. Besides that, they were still fed up with the Fleet Admiral for failing to properly deal with Kuma. And when it comes to the world sinking into the sea, they don't really care since they're already at the highest point. Another one was angry about his meal. He insisted that he ordered beef for dinner, yet he was given fish. The chef profusely apologized to the world noble, but since the Revolutionary Army's attack, their food stocks have been extremely limited. This jerk also calls this beautifully plated meal with garnish, rice, and wine scraps. The celestial swine didn't care about the details. He wouldn't accept the situation either way, and terminated the cook for his failure. But he was far from the only one who was mad about their food situation. One of them missed a meal yesterday and wasn't allowed to have any snacks. To them, this was no different from being treated like a street urchin. They wondered if there was a famine, or if they were going to starve. That's how detached their social sensibilities are from the rest of the world. Skipping lunch and a lack of cookies and milk has made them bloodthirsty and eager to punish. In fact, taking the culprit's life would not suffice for them. They wanted the source of this mismanagement to be tortured. At the same time, an uninvited Figarland Garling entered the room of authority, much to the astonishment of his superiors. They wanted to know what he was doing here. The elderly knight just told them that he's received new orders. Warcurry had no idea what he was talking about and wondered who Garling was referring to. Jupiter wanted to know what Garling was getting at. St. Mars was hardly in a good mood and told the fool to watch himself since he seems to have forgotten his place. Lusjuro kept it simple and waited for an answer. Nobody's supposed to know that someone actually sits on the empty throne, so they're all wondering who the hell could ever issue orders above them. Garling removed his shades and let them know that Vegapunk York is now his to handle. After all, he was just named the new warrior god of science and defense. The elders couldn't believe it, and neither could I. Mars was stunned by the implications. Garling took a seat. He let the other men know that the world is headed for turmoil. A never-before-seen level of rebellion is inevitable. So, he has called upon his fellow elders to work with him to improve the world. A cold sweat went down Jupiter's face. The moon has entered the chat. Back on Egghead, St. Saturn began screaming while addressing the Vice Admirals. Saturn clutched onto his own throat as darkness spilled from his body. The medics still weren't in the room. Vice Admiral Dahl had never seen anything like this before. The Marines knew that they couldn't afford to let anything happen to an elder. They wondered if it might be a disease of some sort, which is ironic considering what he did to Ginny. Or maybe it's just fitting. All the Vice Admirals could do was ask the elder for his orders. St. Saturn's condition only grew worse. He turned into a shriveled up husk. He was in disbelief, but seemed to know what was happening. Everyone in the room was horrified. Saturn thought of Immu as the king of the world's name became the last thing he would ever say. Immu was punishing him. Joy Boy was responsible for the pirate's escape, and Saturn is the reason it happened. Saturn begged for mercy. There was no way he could have foreseen such a power compromising them. But considering they already got orders to destroy Emeth, and he kept it on the low, I don't think it really matters. This is your fault. He really risked it all when there was no need to. A ship-busting, wave-causing ripple of energy was released. All of the Vice Admirals were thrown back by the incredible force. These guys have been getting ragdolled by powers beyond them for way too long now. This is just cruel. Only St. Saturn's skeleton remained. I'm sure Brooke would have a great joke for this. But Tosa looks like he'll be having the same nightmare for years to come. At the very least, painfully punishing St. Saturn might appease the angry celestial dragons. While Garling recently gained their collective favor with the execution of St. Mjosgard. Meanwhile, the Vegapunk satellites that were mourned by the Straw Hats have now ascended to the cloud, on a cloud, in the clouds. Shaka realized that they weren't able to do the same to the Labostratum. Atlas let him know that the traitor York got in the way. Pythagoras reminded them that since the signal reaches all across the globe, York will still be able to connect to it. That was a question we had when we first heard about Punk Records, so I'm glad it's been cleared up. But Edison believed that this much was at least better than making it easy for York. Until they're able to share everything with everyone, they need to keep their brains safe. Shaka didn't see that happening for at least another 500 years, which is a crazy long timeline. But if it wasn't clear already, these guys are effectively immortal. Shaka also hoped that Edison set them up with a roaming cloud. Thankfully he did, but right now, the whole world thinks that the Vegapunks are dead, so they can't exactly tour the world at their leisure. Although, most people don't know there are multiple Vegapunks, or even what he looks like in the first place. Although that broadcast probably changed that last part for many. Frankie considered the guy to be his idol, but he had no idea what he might look like before meeting him. But an inability to leverage their name also means that they won't be receiving any funding. So their research is going to come to a grinding halt. It's all going to be up to their partners. Edison added something onto his body and was satisfied with the results. With a bunch of mix and match pieces, he asked the others how they all look. Atlas laughed at how ridiculous their new body was. Shaka was pleased to see that his proportions seemed to be leading the show. Atlas also wanted to throw away all of York's spare parts. Edison agreed since they were pretty creepy. Vegapunk, you are something else for making York and Lilith the way you did. After that, Edison contacted Weatheria. The weather wizard who taught Nami was totally shocked, since he thought Vegapunk was dead. It's pretty clear that the Vegapunks trust them. In the Kamabaka Queendom, the revolutionaries were still reeling from Vegapunk's broadcast. The thought of the world flooding was especially difficult to comprehend. None of them knew about any of this. Koala recapped. The Void Century covered up a huge war that reached its climax once the ancient weapons were used to plunge the world 200 meters deep into the ocean. On top of that, whoever claims the One Piece will be more than just a pirate king. They may very well gain access to such cataclysmic power for themselves. Bello Betty refused to let that happen. She mulled over the concept of the world sinking. Sabo realized that this is probably why the original Celestial Dragons decided to live on the Red Line. It's the highest point on the planet. Eva realized that this is why slaves have been building massive bridges and structures for 700 years. And I'm really glad they brought that up because I always wanted to know what was going on there, but I just kind of forgot. There's a lot of things we don't know in One Piece. Karasu could see that everything was beginning to fall into place. Lindbergh felt the exact same way, and so did Morley. Despite all this, Dragon wasn't with his commanders. He faced the sea alone, while considering the fact that many who heed Vegapunk's words will act out of self-interest rather than peace. Dragon's timetable seems to have shifted. They need to achieve victory swiftly before people begin killing each other to secure livable locations. We are now entering an era of chaos. For the first time in its history, the world government has had a change in leadership. Dragon already expected their real fight to begin once God's Knights retaliate against them. But now that Garling has secured the highest seat of power he possibly can, and Dragon is being forced to act, things are actually looking crazier than ever. While Luffy and the gang are having a good time getting stronger on Elbaf, the world will be at war. And they're at least partially responsible. However, now that Sing Saturn is dead, the implications of Katarina Devon placing a hand on him becomes even more fascinating. The fight for the One Piece has become really intense. It's nice to see that Oda is able to increase our level of urgency when it comes to the Great Race, even now. Now, the fact that Garling has jurisdiction over York is pretty cool since back in the day, one of God's Knights looked pretty similar to her. With a new member being added to the Five Elders, the opportunity arises for questions to be asked of the world's most informed men. He will be a great deposition tool. In regards to Dragon, at this point, he's gotten a bad rep for being inactive. But I wonder if that's just excitement and curiosity talking, because I'm not really sure when it would have ever been appropriate or better for the story if he showed up. Whatever the case, this was a great chapter. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.